podcast where we know that the only certainty is uncertainty. We know everybody hates change, so we're on a mission to inspire people to see change differently. Our guest lineup of thought leaders, innovators, and transformation pioneers will guide us through uncertainties and discover new opportunities which arise in these interesting times. Today, we're joined by Graham Colclough, a veteran of industry and a trusted voice in the cities market and in habit transformation. As a society, we exist in cities and in urban environments, and any business or organisation is a microcosm of these spaces, which means we can actually learn a lot from how our cities change, and vice versa. How often do businesses look at town planning for new ideas? What opportunities can be discovered by leveraging a cross-sector or cross-city approach? With experience at Shell, Gemini, and his own city transformation agency, Urban DNA, Graham explores alternatives to the status quo, the benefits of risk-taking, and the story of the humble lamppost. Our guest today has had an impressive international career working with Shell and Gemini, holding various roles across strategy, transformation and risk management. He is now founding partner of Urban DNA, a niche organisation seeking to support transformation of the cities market globally. He's also a prominent thought leader on public services, urban renewal and governance via his roles at European Commission Smart Cities Innovation Partnership, UK and Six Nations Smart City Forums and many more. We're delighted to be joined by Graham Colclough. Graham, welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, Jonathan. It's a delight to join you, and I hope I can offer some thoughts that will be of interest to folks.
Definitely, and I think it's a really exciting topic. But before we kind of go into the real nitty-gritty of stuff, can you just give our listeners a rundown of who you are, what you do, and how you got started on the kind of smart cities?
Yeah, actually it goes back a long, long way. My father was a town planner, director of town planning in a town not too far away, and I've almost done full circle. I started in the oil industry and discovered that a lot of the things I was doing was actually about change. I didn't realize it at the time. It was like digging the ditches too fast, and people say, slow down. And as I moved through an oil and gas career, that became more prominent. And then a very good colleague of mine said, well, why don't you do organizational change? And so I moved to Gemini Consulting, which was precisely that. And having had an international career in the oil and gas industry, I then did international change for large corporations. And I guess about, I hate to say, 20 to 30 years ago, a while back, a little small company, technology startup company, phoned up and said, do you want to do business with the Scottish Executive? I'd never heard of the Scottish Executive. And I said, what's that then? And he says, it's your damn government. So I looked into that. I came up to Scotland and realised that the public sector was significantly challenged, really short of cash and needed transformation desperately. And that technology could actually do something about that. That was the sort of early days of when I got involved in technology. So I took that on, and it was a year or so actually getting the project going. Yeah. But after that, it caused me to realize that I really wanted to work in the public sector because it's extraordinarily complex. Yeah. And I like complexity theory, if you like. So I then went back to the group and said I was keen to get involved in the public sector, and more specifically in the local public sector, before the term city or smart city got invented. And that's what I did. So I ran in a big corporation the business that we did with cities and the business we did with the European Commission. Alas, big corporations, when they knock on the door of a mayor's office, the mayor tends to say, good, you do come in. What am I going to get for free from you? So that caused me to realize that actually, if I wanted to make a big impact in the market, then we needed to be speaking to cities from a smaller organization. So that was the genesis of Urban DNA, and the hint is in the title, the DNA. So what's the DNA of cities? And so the intention is really to look and seek to understand what's common and help cities to think about common challenges, because there are many, and how we solve common challenges together in terms of building that community in the sector. And so that's been the genesis of the work over the last 10 years or so, which has taken us around multiple cities, multiple governments, now into the investment community. So that's the background.
And you use the word smart cities there. And for anyone that's not aware, what do you mean when you say smart cities?
Well, there's actually I'm guilty within ISO of coming up with the one of the original ISO definitions of smart city, and I made sure it started with actually understanding the outcomes, the impact that you can make. So it played technology down. There were four things, four features, if you like. One was around collaborative leadership, testing my brain here. Two was around community engagement. Um, Three was around cross sectoral working,
Yeah.
and four was around data and technology. So we split at that stage data and technology and focused on sustainability and all the things that you're trying to actually deliver,
Yeah.
as opposed to most of the definitions that people will come up with in smart city, which starts with technology that does the following thing. And that's just all the wrong way around because it just positions the means as opposed to the end.
Absolutely. And I suppose I'm really interested there of your roles in Shell and Cap Gemini, and then moving into the thing, and kind of what can industry learn from this approach to smart cities, and as you say, that kind of
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
those four pillars that you just kind of
Yeah.
laid out.
So yeah, there's a lot to learn. I mean, the first, because I've helped businesses, I've helped from within industry
Yeah.
to help cities and helped industry figure out how to deal with cities.
Right.
And frankly, I'm still a newbie. I've only been in there for decades, so there's an awful lot to learn. A number of features I think which are really important. Number one is it's an incredibly complex system, and one should never apologize for the complexity or deny it. One needs to understand it. So I think that's absolutely key. It's like a human being and a doctor. It's an integrated system. There's lots of ways of solving problems. It's about knowing those different ways and testing them out in context. So complexity
Mm.
is a reality and is really important. The second thing I think is around policy and politics. Um, Really understanding the context, the conversation that industry needs to have with urban bodies, public bodies,
Mm.
in terms of what's driving it. The third is around public value as opposed to financial outcomes. So there's a kind of political and policy agenda. That's where the conversation starts. And then public value in terms of public value outcomes, the actual impact you're trying to make. And that's really complex. And industry, they're driven by making money, and it's perfectly
Of
understandable.
course.
But trying to figure out in a complex system with political biases what public value really means is difficult. And I think the fourth thing, which is dreadfully important, is that considering a city as a client from an industry perspective is
Yeah.
not the best way of looking at it. Again, commonality.
Mm.
Can you look at that as a system, an urban system? Can you consider the solution that you may have as something that could be applied in multiple cities? So therefore, deal with it as a portfolio. So dealing with cities as a portfolio, as opposed to an individual client, is absolutely vital. Why? For one reason. Anytime I do business to support industry actually doing business with cities, then I say, what's the price of product X or service Y? And they'll come up with a number and I'll say, divide it by 10, and that's your starting point for a conversation with the city. At which point they just choke. But if you can actually think about really doing something very, very different,
Mm.
and you do it as a portfolio across a number of cities, you can take a solution and get economies of scope and scale. Damn thing is, cities are systemically fairly similar. So if you can focus on what pieces of the solution could be scaled or replicated or adapted to the environment of a particular city, you can actually do business differently. So there are significant differences. It's something that you have to do really strategically. Dipping in and dipping out will not work because public procurement, as most people know, is a painful exercise that takes a lot of time. So you've got to get good at it, and you've got to figure out how to get the relationships going to be able to do it address the procurement process successfully. And hopefully, at the back end of that, you've actually taken all the other four things into account.
Yeah.
It's hard. You need to go in with your eyes open. There's no question about that.
And are there any kind of key case studies or ideas of successfully transforming habits, whether that's in an organization or in a city, and are there any major opportunities that are kind of being ignored by industry leaders that you're seeing, come up in this public sector approach?
Um, so any form of change is typically about people,
Mm.
um, and and people think rationally, but what really drives them is internal emotions, is small p politics. Sometimes, alas, in big cities, it's big p politics too. So really trying to get into the mind of who's at the other side of table, because it's not like a relatively simple commercial conversation. It's actually quite complex, and one needs to always think back into who the users are, the you, the me.
Yeah.
That actually 80% of people live in cities in the developed part of the world. So we're the end users, and they're trying to respect public value towards those people. So change in a city's context is really hard,
Mm.
and changing habits is really hard.
Yeah.
It can be done two different ways, and there are different ways of doing that. You look at waste systems. Now I tear the little plastic window out the cardboard, and separate it out there. I would
Okay.
never have thought of doing that 10 years ago.
No.
And that has been a progressive change. And my kids sort of teach me to be sensible about these sorts of things.
Mm.
And there's various different nudges and such like you take, some of which like a carrot shaped stick. Sometimes you get the end of the stick, sometimes you get the carrot, but change occurs relatively slowly. You look at smoking cessation, you
Yeah.
look at wearing seatbelts. The challenge we face now is that we cannot make change that's required at that pace.
No.
And the things that are coming over the parapet at us aren't just one or two slight irritations. There's a cacophony of noise coming over the parapet in terms of multiple challenges. So now we need to really understand how to make change, transformational change, in the head of collective individuals. And that's really hard. So the waste approach is a good one, but there
Mm.
are other approaches I think we need to take, to cause people to feel okay about substantial change that's rapid,
Yeah.
and that's quite hard.
It's that stakeholder buy-in, isn't it? How do you?
It's essential. Yeah, it's not just about stakeholder buy-in. It's actually about involving them at all stages in the process.
Absolutely.
Um, and a lot of people say, geez, I'll involve them once I've got something on paper. Not too bad if you can get it on paper quite quickly, but recognize that you probably have to change it.
Mm.
People are highly imaginative. I've worked in India, and it's India is the land of innovation. They will solve all sorts of problems in the weirdest possible way, but they do it quickly and pragmatically.
Ah.
We need to pick up on that. We need to stop being sort of fat and happy about things. We need to really get some passion about making substantial change rapidly.
Yeah, because if we just listen to the two things you've just said of making sure that everyone's involved throughout the process, but then also this need for speedy change, those are almost diametrically opposed. And
They are. There's one word I'd stick in the middle of that:
mm.
trust.
Ah, okay, so
If
yeah.
Yeah, if you can, so think recently in this country,
Mm.
think in Europe, think in a global context, the trust in politics. Well, those two words don't really go together particularly well, do they? Um, how can you actually build trust between people, and people who respect public value, who are politically selected? Well, interestingly, they're
Mm.
politically selected locally, particularly in smaller cities. You see them on the street walking, and you'll have a little word if you're not happy. So there's something here that actually says smaller places with modest sized people are actually the opportunity to connect between political decision makers on public value and real people is better. If you can develop trust there, there's far greater chance that people will be prepared to take an element of risk, be they politicians or
Mm.
real people. And that's what's missing, I think, a lot in our ability to make rapid change.
Yeah. And I suppose from an industry perspective, there it's the difference of, waiting for your Shells and your Coca-Colas and your Mars to make the change, or finding the innovation from, the industry. And I suppose from an industry perspective, there it's the difference of, waiting for your Shells and your Coca-Colas and your Mars to make the change, or finding the innovation from, the industry. And I suppose from an industry perspective, there it's the difference of, waiting for your Shells and your Coca-Colas and your Mars to make the change, or the smaller startups or the smaller businesses that, maybe have a little bit more. It's interesting because bigger companies financially can take the risks, but actually it's often the smaller companies that are innovating, that are taking the risks, that are finding the new pathways. So that's quite interesting
Exactly.
that there's a parallel there.
Yeah, no, you raise. I think if you sit in the industry side of things,
Mm.
the real difference between large industry and small industry. As I was saying, I worked in a very large
Okay.
industrial, and you'd walk into a mayor's office. You'd certainly be able to walk into a
Yeah.
mayor's office, and people will get you lots of meetings. And it's harder for a small company necessarily to get that sort of exposure. But small organizations is where a lot of innovation happens. There's a great deal more, I think, in a Scottish word, couthiness, respect between people. So it's harder to get in the room. But once a small business gets in the room, they tend to listen more,
Mm.
and they tend to be more prepared to change and tailor the solutions. So if you get a good quality conversation going between small businesses, I think they are really a good place to start. And my frank view is small cities too. So interestingly, small businesses do well in small cities,
Yeah.
and that's where innovation quite often happens because it's innovation where you're actually involving people. Big businesses say, "This is the way we work. This is the product we've got. We'll sell it to you." Small businesses say, "Well, okay, so how can we flex and invent a different way of doing things?"
I suppose then my question off the back of that is with regards to innovation, we see new ideas coming up all the time, whether that's in industry, in cities, but they can often fail to engage. And have you had any particular case studies or ideas that have come up in smart cities that industries can learn from about kind of engaging users, engaging the people that actually the stakeholders of a city
Yeah,
into new
yeah,
ideas?
yeah. So I'm going to give you two
Mm.
examples that are different. Um, 10 years ago to the year, we launched an initiative in Europe called the Humble Lamppost.
Okay.
And we called it the Humble Lamppost because at the time we're talking about lampposts as places that dogs did things to. And people at the time, the technologists in the room, because it was in a basement in Brussels on a Friday afternoon, all the technologists in the room said, "You mean smart lampposts?" And I said, "No, I don't actually." Or intelligent lamppost. "No, I don't. I mean the humble lamppost because cars dent it, but actually that asset could be used for all sorts of things. It's several meters high. You could put cameras on it. You can
Mm.
put sensors on it. There's a lot you can do to it to actually improve the quality of the environment, the quality of air, the safety for people, the ability to actually drive autonomous vehicles. There's an awful lot you can do to that poor little humble lamppost. Now, it's taken 10 years, and I thought this was going to be a quick win.
Yeah.
I thought we'd be able to actually implement this at a European level at scale because do you know what? Lampposts are like aspirins. You don't need to have a personally designed aspirin, neither do you need to have a personally designed lamppost. However, the devil is always in the detail, and indeed, we're moving in the right direction, but it's shockingly slow. The intriguing thing there is that a lamppost to most people is still a rather boring asset they don't pay attention to. So if you want co-creation around lampposts, it's a tad hard.
Yeah.
But it is an asset that you could do an awful lot with to actually improve outcomes in a city. So that's been 10 years, and in my view, a bit of a failure in terms of transformation. Improvement, yes.
Mm.
New standards, yes. Recognition and real things happening in cities, yes, but way too slowly.
Yeah.
And more recently, and more excitingly, I have to say, at least at this stage, I hope it's not a 10-year journey, we have something called mobility islands. And in the parlance of many cities, they talk about transport interchanges or transport hubs,
Yep.
terms which are not the sort of thing that the average Joe's going to go, "Oh, I can't wait to go and visit that." But if you use the term a mobility island, you go, "Island, what's that like?" It might be sunny, I might meet people, I might have a cup of coffee, I might enjoy it.
Hmm.
And so the concept of mobility islands to transform the way that a city breathes its people and its goods in and out every day. So how do you transform that? You don't put lots and lots of car charging points down for electric car charging points and then have the people that can afford an electric car to have that. That's one way but that's just going to get the same number of cars on the street.
Mm.
How do we get people out of cars onto their feet because it's healthier, walking around, meeting people, using light, electric, clean vehicles,
Yeah.
and actually walking instead of traveling? And how do you get them to meet each other? Well, by putting an island there, which is intriguing, which has got a defibrillator, which has got a cafe, which has got locker boxes to put my rucksack in, all of these sorts of things, which are nothing about transport, they're about place. How do you place these around a city in a way that's visible, it's interesting, it's pleasant, it's aesthetically nice? So what we have an initiative with a dozen or so, it's actually 20 cities around Europe at the moment, to co-develop the concept of mobility islands, to blueprint them so that you can actually repeat them or tailor them to my local place. And most importantly, that's reasonably common such that industry can engage in that and actually come up with, put their research dollars into it because they know they've got scale. It will be replicated. So they'll get more profit and it's going to be an easier sales cycle.
Yeah.
What's interesting about the contrast between a lamppost, which is dreadfully boring, and a mobility island, which is causing you to move around a city, is that people actually take an interest in that latter one. And for me, that's a good example of where we're trying to really completely change, rapidly change the way that people move around a place or a city
Mm.
um, by involving people. So
And
I think there's one's taken 10 years, slowly moving in the right direction. The other one I think we need is a really good example of where we could actually do something to connect cross sectors, to connect cross industry,
yeah.
and actually make change happen faster, positive change.
Well, that was really kind of what I was thinking of those kind of ideas don't just come out of one or two people, is it? It's that kind of focusing on the cross sector, focusing on joined up collaborative ecosystems, bringing everyone together,
Yeah,
making sure that you get
yeah.
the ideas that will actually inspire and push forward. So have you seen, with those types of projects like Mobility Island, that cross sector thinking, how does that help? With new ideas in kind of spreading risk, opening new opportunities, especially in the public sector, but also I imagine in industry as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I know. Let's start in industry because that for me is an intriguing place to start. I had a
Mm.
discussion with the chief executive of Sandyford Business Park about mobility islands and
Yeah.
about innovation a couple of weeks ago. He's he's got a big business park. It's one of the biggest in Ireland, and he's got big industry in there, big tech industry also for America in there, and lots of local SMEs. And we're talking about how he could actually cause his ecosystem of suppliers, big and small, to come together around a different topic.
Mm.
And we use mobility islands as that. And he's got his utility, and the utility has got at the end of the electric cable a large piece of ground. Um, and he said, well, why can't we use that to actually put the mobility island in? And they went, oh, never really thought about that. So the idea of bringing different sizes, different perspectives, different skills together in a physical environment to innovate
Mm.
is exactly what that discussion was about. So we're
Yeah.
talking about how to build an innovation hub in his business park, which is not, the big company building that people are invited in to provide value to the big company. It's actually something which is convened for public value for the people, involves the people to solve problems. So they will come and get involved in this, and lots of different industry perspectives and skills will also arrive to actually innovate because ideas come from funny places.
Mm. Was
And
that,
it's not just about those daft ideas, it's actually how do you create the environment that will continuously convene that and nurture it and then build businesses out of it. And for me, that's moving from cities to innovation, urban
mm.
innovation, and the role that cities can play in that, and the role that industry can play in that sort of thing too.
It kind of sounds not quite circular economy, but there's elements of that in
It's
there.
very close to that. Yes. No. So that's, I'd say, circular economy
Mm.
or shared economy. That's how we shift our thinking from our current government uses. Well, in fact, it's not there; they're not the problem. Hopefully, the solution.
Mm,
But lots of politicians think the answer is growth. So let's talk about economic
mm,
growth. Well, I would like to posit that actually learning to live with less is probably a good thing. So if we, and that's not going to necessarily mean that it's not a thriving place or it's not a prosperous and pleasant
mm,
place. It shifts towards reuse, and it goes beyond that towards shared
yeah.
use. And in cities, there's an enormous portfolio of assets which are shockingly underused. So if you look at it from a pan city perspective, from a pansectoral perspective, you can actually say, well, wait a second, there's an awful lot we can do in terms of not just circularity, which is a good thing, also sharing. And if you get into sharing, then you start to get into collaboration, all sorts of other good things too.
Yeah. And I suppose just off the back of those kind of ideas there of transformation, change, all of these words, it does mean moving away from the status quo quite often. And I think you mentioned at the top of the episode, businesses are built for profit. And quite often these ideas can, I suppose, scare the shareholders in terms of that sounds great, but that's going to affect the bottom line. So,
Yeah.
are there any kind of ideas that you see in the next, year, 5 years, 10 years, because we know how long even lampposts take to change, that the industry can get behind, that can actually mean benefits for people, profit, and planet? And that's a very big question. Sorry.
It is. It is. So I think I had a discussion this morning with a chap from
Mm,
Korea who is technology literate, where I'm technology informed. And we were talking about the use of AI
yes.
to fundamentally transform both the process of thinking through how do you make a place a better place and the actual selection of the appropriate solution specific to the context of that place. And it really that conversation is not just a one-off. We've been having it for a while, but it really, in my mind, does reinforce that all industries aren't necessarily going to be cannibalized and killed as a result of AI. It is an enormous opportunity to actually rethink how you can do things smarter, better. And I think for me, that's it's a technology, a data advancement, a technology advancement, which we must embrace
Mm,
as opposed to resist, and figure out how that can transform. So I think that for me in any industry is an opportunity, and it needs to be looked at as an opportunity, not as a threat. There's clearly downsides, black side, dark sides to
of
it all,
course.
and that's about managing it right. So that would be one common opportunity for
Yeah.
all. The question is a huge question, so I will stop at that point because trying to tackle that
Yeah.
vast array is going to be a bit
It was
hard, I'm afraid,
kind of
Jonathan.
throwing you under the bus there, but yeah, I think kind of bringing it all to a close, and it's so interesting. There's so many tangents we could go off, and as you say, so many very expansive questions and answers that we can kind of talk about in terms of cities and industry and change and transformation habits and stuff. But kind of one of the things you keep coming back to is collaboration, and I think that's something that I've seen in my time in the industry is that lack of communication, that lack of collaboration across all different topics, whether that's in a particular sector or whether that's around a particular thing like sustainability. So yeah, I mean, what do you see as the future of learning from other sectors and I suppose being able to really tackle the challenges that are actually going to really impact our future?
Yeah. Yeah. No, no. I think we need to solve different things in a different
Mm,
way, and that's really hard. Um, Collaboration, working together, is a fundamental thing that we need to learn very quickly to get good at. It's not coincidental. It's something that needs to be managed. Um, I think there is an opportunity for leaders of place to support that because they seek towards they are in a position, they're elected by us, they're in a position to actually try and get fair value. out of something that is the use of resource or circularity. And so I think there is an important role. And I'm not saying that every place and every public or politician or public servant can do it, but there's a learning all over the place in terms of how do we actually manage to bring the public and the private sectors together to solve the big issues that we face in a different way by collaborating, by innovating. And I think that's absolutely vital. There is an ingredient missing. It's called money.
Yeah.
How you flex money is key. There's bucketfuls of it in the private market, and there's hardly any of it in the public sector.
Yeah.
Yet the public sector funds can actually pay for some of that risk. So actually understanding not just what's the technical solution, or golly, we need to think about use cases and users to come up with a social solution. There's a piece we need to wrestle with now, which is about what is the ownership and the business models and the financing mechanism to make this work.
Yeah.
Complexity, social, technical, business models, and finances. We need to understand how to bring those three skill sets together, and they are fundamentally different in the public sector and the private sector. So, solving different problems differently is something that we have to do.
Yeah.
So therefore, we just need to convene it and manage it. It's not a case of saying that's complicated, so I'm not going to do it. I think somewhere down the line, the folks that say those sorts of things will probably not be around doing what they're doing. We just need to wrestle
Yeah.
with this, because you look at the challenges we face, and they are getting closer to us and larger.
Yeah. And I read an article you wrote 4 years ago around, investing 25 million to then kind of kickstart 250 million euros worth of investment. And we see companies taking risks, or, you look at Twitter X and all that, billions of shares and investments lost and stuff. I suppose the approach for me is, if we look at the news recently about Carpetright in the UK, sorry to our international listeners, but a high street carpet seller, I think the only one that I'm aware of selling, going into administration. I think it's now been saved, but this is the common story about urban, high streets at the minute. If there's investment from those public sectors early on into regeneration, into smart cities, into projects like Mobility Island, then surely the balance gets paid at some point later when they kind of reap the benefits from that by having having engaged vibrant places. Yeah. So
the high street issue is a real one. I mean, one needs to look at that in context, but I think it is feasible, and there are cities in I do more business internationally than locally in the UK, but there are cities internationally that are really well led, both politically and professionally, where there's a really trusting relationship between public bodies that make decisions and the people, that are doing spectacular things in terms of making advancement. And it's good for their local businesses. And they understand both how to be challenging towards them and supportive towards them. And they're really thriving, successful, and intriguing. They're small, but they're growing cities too. You'll never manage to get a situation where they're all like that and where all businesses in small cities do well. But we clearly need to aim towards those quite stretching targets, and see what we can do to achieve them, at least as close as we can.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by, you mentioned India earlier, and there's clearly stuff happening across, internationally, and it's a very interesting subject. And as we say, we could probably go on for a long time, even just on the high street, etc. I think, clear takeaways from my side of what you've been saying is, trust, collaboration, and I think we maybe haven't touched on it enough, but, that risk-taking approach that we mentioned at the top of the episode, and how, there needs to be a little element of that from industry to kind of support themselves and, whatever is going to change in industry in the next 5 to 10 to 15, 20 years.
Just on that point, if I may, risk is important.
Yes.
If you build trust, if you get quality collaboration, if you have a discussion where you think you've agreed and you run it through a few times, you'll agree that you agree. you're naturally managing down risk.
Mm.
So that happens just through that process, through collaboration, through genuine affinity between people of different sectors. I don't know. That's a good thing to say.
Yeah.
Somebody will let me offer you some thoughts. That process reduces the risk, and then the investment is a lot more secured because the investment needs to be used by real people that need to change to actually consume it. Think of waste and recycling. So you'll do far better by getting. That's why collaboration is so vital.
Mm.
But risk is a product of but high risk is a product of bad collaboration in many ways, not all the time.
Absolutely.
I think that dimension is important to think about. You're naturally managing risk through collaboration.
Of course. And talking of collaboration, if any of our listeners, businesses, or local initiatives are interested more in smart cities, what's on the radar for the coming months, and how can people get in touch with Urban DNA?
More than likely, it will involve continued activities on this mobility topic. But what we're currently working on, I talked about AI. What we're currently working on is basically how to cannibalize our own advisory business by actually figuring out how can AI not think for us, but how can it help the thinking process and actually make it a lot more efficient, and research into all sorts of things around facts that we can never get a hold of, maybe do some analytics, actually start to generate some analytics that works so that effectively you can speed up the process of helping a city figure out where to go, and also perhaps speed up the process of figuring out a de-risk solution that would be worthwhile applying. So for me, that's the thinking part of the business. The planning, the community engagement, the specific solutions. We're working across a whole variety of different fronts on cities. It's fun. It's great fun.
Brilliant. Really enjoyed our conversation today, Graham. Where can people find you online if they kind of want to find out more about yourself and Urban DNA?
The best thing would be to just email, frankly. We've got websites, got telephones and such like, but that's the continuous channel that does work. And please do feel free to share my contact details with people if they're interested.
We'll put that all in the show notes. Graham, thank you so much for taking your time today, and we look forward to seeing a mobility island near us soon.
It would be good. Thanks again. Lovely to chat.
Take care. Well, there you have it. Powerful insights into the world of business and what lies ahead. Thank you to all our Change Shapers listeners for tuning into our podcast, and to our guest today for sharing their knowledge with our community. Our episodes are designed to spark conversation and start collaborations. So if you're interested by what you heard, then please share with your colleagues or on social media and join the chat with our guest today. Change Shapers is part of the Casaris brand, and we can be found on LinkedIn. Just search for COSARIS, or on Instagram as Change Shapers Podcast. Please subscribe, rate and review Change Shapers Podcast. We can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and wherever you find your favourite pods. I've been Jay Taylor. Let's turn uncertainty into opportunity together. Catch you in the next episode.